Brian Keith died in Malibu on June 24, 1997. The news did not stop the country. It did not interrupt broadcasts or demand collective attention. It appeared briefly, quietly, and then moved on, strangely mismatched with the image he had represented on American screens for more than half a century. There was no national pause, no tribute night large enough to hold him in public memory. He did not leave like a star. He left like something that had always been there, something assumed to be permanent, quietly removed once its function was complete. And it was that absence of reaction that felt unsettling, because Brian Keith had spent his entire career representing steadiness. He was the man who entered a scene and restored order, the father, the protector, the figure whose presence alone reassured the audience that things would not fall apart. Yet when he was gone, the system barely noticed. That contradiction sits at the center of Brian Keith's life. On screen, he was stability itself. Off screen, much of his life unfolded outside the frame, shaped by discipline, endurance, and losses that never found a place in the stories he was allowed to tell. His career was not built on stardom, but on usefulness, and usefulness, once defined, can become a cage. Brian Keith was born Robert Alba Keith Jr. on November 14, 1921, in Bayonne, New Jersey, into a world where performance was not a dream, but a routine. His father, Robert Keith, was a character actor who moved constantly between stage and film. His mother, Helena Shipman, was a stage actress. Childhood for Brian was not centered around a fixed home, but around dressing rooms, backstage corridors, and the rhythm of adult schedules. Stability did not come from place, it came from professionalism, being on time, being ready, not disrupting the flow. At just 3 years old, he appeared in the silent film Pied Piper Malone in 1924. It was not the beginning of a child actor career. There were no contracts, no follow-ups, no cultivated trajectory. It was simply something that happened, then stopped. After his parents divorced, Brian lived mostly with his mother, moving between Long Island and Hollywood. He grew up surrounded by adults trained to maintain composure no matter what was happening behind the scenes. Standing firm was not praised, it was expected. He graduated from East Rockaway High School in 1939, but there was no clear path ahead. He knew the world of entertainment intimately, yet had no secure place within it. That tension, familiarity without belonging, shaped the man he would become. He learned to adapt, to fit where needed, to avoid being a disruption. Those habits would follow him for life. In 1941, Brian Keith stepped away from entertainment entirely and joined the United States Marine Corps. War stripped away any illusion that image could protect you. He served as a radio man and tail gunner aboard SBD Dauntless dive bombers in the Pacific Theater, flying missions over the Solomon Islands. It was a position at the rear of the aircraft, responsible for guarding against attack from behind. No control over direction, no authority over outcome, only vigilance. The war did not give him heroic stories that could be easily told. It gave him something quieter and heavier, a permanent state of readiness. Survival was not dramatic, it was repetitive. Loud engines, constant alertness, tension without release. He earned the Air Medal and the Asiatic Pacific Campaign Medal with 3 bronze stars, but those decorations marked survival, not meaning. When the war ended in 1945, Brian Keith returned to civilian life carrying something invisible, not trauma that demanded expression, but discipline that refused to relax. New York did not pause for returning soldiers. The stage was already moving. Brian stepped into theater not as a man rediscovering himself, but as someone changing uniforms. Broadway productions like Mr. Roberts placed him inside ensemble structures where individual identity mattered less than rhythm. His role was to keep the system running smoothly. When the curtain fell, little of him lingered. That was not failure, it was function. Live television in the early 1950s reinforced that pattern. Anthology series like Tales of Tomorrow, United States Steel Hour, and Robert Montgomery Presents demanded precision under pressure. No retakes, no safety net. Emotion had to appear exactly on cue and disappear just as quickly. Keith became known not as a star, but as reliable, someone who could carry tension without collapsing a scene. That reputation mattered deeply inside the industry, even if it meant little to public memory. Hollywood soon recognized his utility. Films like Arrowhead, The Violent Men, Nightfall, and Run of the Arrow placed him in roles that required physical presence and moral weight, but not central focus. He was the load-bearing element, the man who made stories feel solid. In the rigid hierarchy of the studio system, that meant steady work, but rarely promotion to center stage. No awards campaigns, no star branding, just repetition. Occasionally, the system tested him. The television series The Westerner in 1960 gave him a rare opportunity to hold the center in a morally complex, dark narrative shaped by Sam Peckinpah. The show was critically respected, but short-lived, too severe for mass television comfort. It proved his capacity, but also revealed the system's limits. American television was not prepared to live with that kind of darkness. Disney changed everything. The Parent Trap in 1961 reframed the Brian entirely. He became the father figure, firm, awkward, dependable. Audiences embraced him instantly. The industry noticed. This image was safe, reusable, profitable. From that point on, the mold hardened. Films like Moon Pilot, Savage Sam, and Johnny Shiloh reinforced the same presence: authority without threat, stability without discomfort. When Family Affair premiered in 1966, the transformation was complete. Uncle Bill Davis was not just a character, he was a habit. Week after week, Brian Keith entered American living rooms and restored order. 138 episodes etched that image into cultural reflex. 3 Emmy Awards confirmed what the system already knew. He was an anchor, not a disruptor, not a reinvention, a guarantee. Success did not free him, it sealed him in. When Family Affair ended, no new role could replicate that level of familiarity. Attempts to rebuild the center, The Brian Keith Show, Archer, came and went. Films like The Wind and the Lion briefly reminded critics of his depth, but they did not change the system's habits. By the time Hardcastle and McCormick arrived in the 1980s, Brian Keith was no longer asked who he could become, he was asked how long he could remain exactly the same. In his private life, the same discipline ruled. Work dictated rhythm. Absence was normal. Emotion was contained. The death of his son, Michael, in 1963 did not alter the schedule. Grief had no role to play. It appeared only in small silences, longer pauses, earlier nights. When his wife Daisy died in 1997, the structure finally began to collapse. Routine continued, but without elasticity. Health declined. Lung cancer and emphysema eroded the one thing he had always relied on: endurance. As work slowed, so did income. Medical costs rose. For a man whose identity had been tied to usefulness, the loss of function was devastating. On June 24, 1997, Brian Keith ended his life. There was no collective reckoning. Reruns continued. Uncle Bill still entered the room on schedule. The image remained intact, even as the man who carried it was gone. What survives is posture, authority, stability. What does not survive is the weight required to hold that posture for a lifetime. Brian Keith restored order on screen. Off-screen, there was no rerun, only the quiet space where steadiness stopped being a choice and became an obligation held too long. If his presence still feels familiar, that is not an accident. It is the mark of a man who became a system, and systems rarely pause to mourn the parts that kept them running.